The rain didn't fall gently that night. It poured like the city itself was breaking down, washing neon lights into bleeding rivers across the pavement. People rushed past with collars raised and umbrellas tilted, their faces locked forward, eyes trained on destinations that mattered more than anyone else. No one noticed the man kneeling beside a black luxury car, his $1,000 suit soaked, his hands trembling as he pressed his forehead against the cold metal door. No one except the homeless man sitting beneath the flickering street lamp across the road. The billionaire's name was Victor Hale, though tonight that name meant nothing. Not the headlines, not the private jets, not the empire worth billions. In that moment, he was just a man whose world had finally collapsed under the weight of its own lies. His phone buzzed again, another message he couldn't bring himself to read. He already knew what it said. Accounts frozen. Partners gone. A betrayal so deep it had emptied his chest. The sound that escaped his throat wasn't a sob. It was something raw, something broken. "God, please," he whispered, rain mixing with tears he never allowed himself to shed. "I don't know how to fix this." Across the street, the homeless man lifted his head. His beard was untrimmed, his coat frayed, his boots worn down to the sole, but his eyes were sharp, alive. The kind of eyes that had seen both the top and the bottom of life. Most people avoided him like a stain on the sidewalk. Victor would have too any other night, but fate doesn't ask permission. The homeless man stood slowly, joints stiff from cold and age. He crossed the street without rushing, rain soaking him through instantly. When he stopped a few feet from Victor, he didn't ask for money. He didn't apologize for existing. He simply spoke, his voice calm, steady, and impossibly clear. "I can fix it." Victor laughed, a sharp, broken sound. He turned, anger flashing through his grief. "You don't even know who I am?" The man nodded. "Doesn't matter. Pain sounds the same in every language." Something about that made Victor pause. He looked at the stranger properly now. Not the clothes, not the smell, the eyes. They weren't begging. They weren't weak. They were knowing. "You think you can fix what billions couldn't?" Victor snapped. The homeless man smiled faintly. "Money builds walls. It doesn't teach you how to stand when they fall." Silence stretched between them, filled only by rain and distant sirens. Victor felt something shift, small, uncomfortable, dangerous. Hope. "Why would you help me?" he asked quietly. The man looked up at the sky. "Because once someone ignored my cry, and I became this." Victor swallowed. For the first time in his life, he listened. The homeless man did not introduce himself right away. He simply stood there in the rain, letting silence do what words often failed to do, force truth to the surface. Victor straightened slowly, his expensive shoes sinking into a shallow puddle, his pride already drowned long before the rain began. He had spent his entire life controlling rooms, conversations, people. Yet now, standing in front of a man with nothing, he felt exposed, stripped of every title that once protected him. The homeless man gestured toward the awning of a closed bookstore nearby. "If you're going to listen," he said calmly, "it's better not to do it while freezing." Victor hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to follow. This man was a stranger, a nobody. Society had trained him to look past men like this. But tonight Victor had nothing left to lose. He followed. Under the awning, the city noise dulled, and for the first time in hours, Victor could breathe. The homeless man sat on an overturned crate as if it were a throne. His movements were slow but deliberate, like someone who had learned patience the hard way. "You asked why I'd help you," he said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "The better question is, why are you still standing when everything you built is gone?" Victor clenched his jaw. "Because I don't know how to stop," he replied. "If I stop, it becomes real." The man nodded. "That's the first mistake powerful men make. Thinking motion is the same as progress." Victor studied him again. The beard, the scars on his hands, the posture, straight, dignified, unbroken. "You don't talk like a man who belongs on the street," Victor said. The homeless man smiled faintly, not offended. "Neither did you. Look like a man who'd be crying in the rain." That landed harder than any insult. Victor exhaled slowly. "What's your name?" The man hesitated as if the word itself carried weight. "Elias," he said finally. "Most people stopped asking years ago." Elias began to speak. Not dramatically, not with self-pity, but with the calm honesty of someone who had already made peace with his past. He talked about a time when he wore suits, too. Cheaper than Victor S., but earned honestly. He had been an engineer, a problem solver. The kind companies relied on when systems failed. I fixed things no one else could, Elias said, until the day. I couldn't fix my own life. He spoke of a company that took his ideas, a partner who took his credit, a legal battle he couldn't afford to fight. He spoke of a wife who believed in him until the eviction notice arrived, and a son who stopped calling after Elias missed too many birthdays chasing justice. That never came. I didn't become homeless overnight. He said I became invisible first. Victor felt something twist inside him. He knew this story, not because he had lived it, but because he had caused versions of it. Why didn't you fight back? Victor asked quietly. Elias chuckled. I did, but the system listens to money louder than truth. That sentence hit. The homeless man did not introduce himself right away. He simply stood there in the rain, letting silence do what words often failed to do, force truth to the surface. Victor straightened slowly, his expensive shoes sinking into a shallow puddle, his pride already drowned long before the rain began. He had spent his entire life controlling rooms, conversations, people. Yet now, standing in front of a man with nothing, he felt exposed, stripped of every title that once protected him. The homeless man gestured toward the awning of a closed bookstore nearby. If you're going to listen, he said calmly, it's better not to do it while freezing. Victor hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to follow. This man was a stranger, a nobody. Society had trained him to look past men like this. But tonight Victor had nothing left to lose. He followed. Under the awning, the city noise dulled, and for the first time in hours, Victor could breathe. The homeless man sat on an overturned crate as if it were a throne. His movements were slow but deliberate, like someone who had learned patience the hard way. You asked why I'd help you, he said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. The better question is, why are you still standing when everything you built is gone? Victor clenched his jaw. Because I don't know how to stop, he replied. If I stop, it becomes real. The man nodded. That's the first mistake powerful men make. Thinking motion is the same as progress. Victor studied him again. The beard, the scars on his hands, the posture, straight, dignified, unbroken. You don't talk like a man who belongs on the street, Victor said. The homeless man smiled faintly, not offended. Neither did you. Look like a man who'd be crying in the rain. That landed harder than any insult. Victor exhaled slowly. What's your name? The man hesitated as if the word itself carried weight. Elias, he said finally. Most people stopped asking years ago. Elias began to speak. Not dramatically, not with self-pity, but with the calm honesty of someone who had already made peace with his past. He talked about a time when he wore suits, too. Cheaper than Victor S., but earned honestly. He had been an engineer, a problem solver. The kind companies relied on when systems failed. I fixed things no one else could, Elias said, until the day. I couldn't fix my own life. He spoke of a company that took his ideas, a partner who took his credit, a legal battle he couldn't afford to fight. He spoke of a wife who believed in him until the eviction notice arrived, and a son who stopped calling after Elias missed too many birthdays chasing justice. That never came. I didn't become homeless overnight. He said I became invisible first. Victor felt something twist inside him. He knew this story, not because he had lived it, but because he had caused versions of it. Why didn't you fight back? Victor asked quietly. Elias chuckled. I did, but the system listens to money louder than truth. That sentence hit. Morning didn't knock, it invaded. Victor woke on a hard bench with a stiff neck and the metallic taste of regret in his mouth. The city stretched awake around him, indifferent, efficient, relentless. For the first time in decades, Victor had nowhere to be and no one waiting for his call. The absence felt like vertigo. He checked his phone out of habit, then stopped himself. Elias's rules echoed in his head. No hiding, no control. He stood, brushed dust from his jacket, and walked toward the shelter where Elias had said they would meet. Each step felt like a small betrayal of the man he used to be, and a fragile loyalty to the man he might become. Elias was already there, sitting with a cup of thin coffee, watching people pass as if the street itself were a classroom. He didn't greet Victor with praise or surprise. He simply nodded. Good, you came back. Victor shrugged. I don't know why. Elias sipped his coffee. That's honest. Honesty is useful. They walked together without a plan, past boarded shops and early buses, past faces Victor had never learned to see. Today, Elias said, you're going to look at your empire without the mirrors. Victor frowned. I don't have access anymore. Elias stopped. You don't need access. You need memory. They sat on the curb. Elias asked questions, quiet, precise, merciless. Why did you buy the logistics firm? Victor answered automatically, then paused. Because my advisors said it would scale. Elias nodded. Why did you trust them? Victor hesitated. Because they'd been right before. Elias leaned in. And why were they right before? Victor stared at the street. The answer came slowly. Because the market was forgiving. Because timing hid mistakes. Elias tapped the ground with his knuckle. Luck feels like genius when you're winning. The sentence settled heavy. Victor felt something unwind inside him, threads of pride loosening, revealing knots beneath. Elias pushed further. He asked about board members, about debt ratios, about acquisitions Victor barely remembered approving. With each answer, a pattern emerged, speed over substance, growth over grounding. You built a tower on momentum, Elias said. Momentum ends, Victor swallowed. I thought diversification protected me. Elias shook his head. Diversification without understanding is camouflage. It hides risk until it's too late. Victor closed his eyes. He remembered nights choosing deals because they felt inevitable. Because saying no felt like weakness. I was afraid to slow down, he admitted. Elias nodded. Power teaches you to fear stillness. The street teaches you to survive it. They passed a pawn shop window where Victor caught his reflection. Tired eyes, cheaper clothes, no emblem of status. He felt smaller, lighter, both scared him. His phone buzzed again despite his resolve. He read it this time, a former partner, polite words masking relief, severing ties. Then another. At midday they stopped near a construction site. Elias pointed to exposed rebar and half-poured concrete. That building won't rise today, he said. They'll test, cure, wait. Victor nodded. I hated waiting. Elias smiled faintly. I know. He explained how systems fail where incentives reward speed without accountability, how organizations rot when truth is delayed to protect egos. Victor listened, recognizing his own meetings, his own impatience. Your empire broke because truth arrived late, Elias said. By the time it did, it was too loud to ignore. They met Maria again and a man named Thomas, who kept meticulous notes of people's stories in a battered notebook. Thomas spoke about a factory that closed after executives took bonuses and fled. Victor felt heat rise in his face. I didn't do that, he said reflexively. Elias raised a hand, not accusing, not absolving. Intent doesn't erase impact. The words cut clean. Victor realized how often he'd hidden behind intention to avoid consequence. He apologized, to Thomas, to Maria, to no one and everyone. The apology felt clumsy, inadequate, necessary. As afternoon waned, Elias finally turned the lesson inward. The empire you lost, he said, was efficient, profitable, admired. It was also brittle. He asked Victor what. He'd protected at all costs. Victor thought of quarterly targets, share price, public confidence. And what did you neglect? Elias pressed. Victor answered softly. Redundancy, dissent, depth. Elias nodded. Resilience lives where dissent is welcomed. Victor imagined meetings where he'd shut down, concerns with charm or impatience. He felt the weight of it now. Dusk painted the city amber. Victor's phone buzzed one last time, a message from his sister he hadn't spoken to in years. I saw the news. Are you okay? Victor stared at the screen, stunned by the simplicity of care. He typed back slowly. No, but I'm learning. He put the phone away, heart pounding. Elias watched him with quiet approval. That, Elias said, is rebuilding. They ended the day near the river, water moving without hurry, without apology. Elias summarized without sermon. Your broken empire taught you what success hid. Speed isn't strength. Image isn't identity. Money isn't meaning. Victor nodded, exhausted, changed. What happens tomorrow? Elias looked at the current. Tomorrow you face the fear you've been avoiding, the one money kept. Away, Victor swallowed. Which fear? Elias met his eyes. Losing control The morning began without ceremony. No alarms, no assistance. No schedule printed in neat columns. Victor woke to the sound of footsteps and distant traffic. His body stiff, his mind alert in a way it hadn't been for years. Control used to wake him. Today, curiosity did. Elias was already moving, folding a blanket with practiced care. His actions efficient without haste. We learn best before the city gets loud, he said. Victor followed, unsure what learning looked like without whiteboards and titles. The street, it turned out, was the classroom. They started with simple tasks: carrying boxes at a food distribution, sweeping a sidewalk in front of a shuttered cafe, listening more than speaking. Victor noticed how Elias introduced him without context, without apology. "This is Victor," he'd say. Nothing else. Victor felt stripped, then strangely relieved. Without status, he had to show up as himself. People responded to effort, not reputation. An old man named Harold corrected Victor's sweeping technique with a chuckle. A woman named Lena thanked him for carrying bags. These micro-acknowledgments felt disproportionate to the effort, like sunlight after years indoors. Between tasks, Elias talked, not lecturing but observing. He pointed out how information traveled on the street through trust, how favors became currency, how reputations were earned daily. "You think the market is complex," Elias said, watching two men barter cigarettes for a sandwich. "This is the original. Market, transparent, immediate, unforgiving." Victor nodded, recognizing principles he'd buried under abstractions. "No leverage," Victor said. Elias smiled. "Only relationships." They paused near a bus stop where a woman argued with an invisible adversary, her voice cracking with urgency. Victor looked away, uncomfortable. Elias didn't. "Look," he said quietly. "Discomfort is data." Victor forced himself to watch, to listen. He felt the reflex to solve, to intervene with money or authority. Elias stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Presence before solutions," he said. "People don't need fixing as much as they need witnessing." The sentence lodged in Victor's chest. How many times had he offered solutions before understanding problems? By noon, hunger sharpened focus. Elias shared a meal bought with pooled change. Victor noticed how gratitude traveled around the table, how stories emerged once bellies were full. Thomas read from his notebook, a poem scribbled by a man who slept under a bridge. It was rough, honest, alive. Victor felt embarrassed by the applause he'd given to safer art in gilded rooms. He clapped here, genuinely. The poet smiled, stunned. Victor learned something then. Encouragement could be a form of capital. Elias took Victor to a corner where a young man named Reggie repaired bicycles with scavenged parts. "Watch," Elias said. Reggie tested a brake, adjusted a cable, nodded. "People think broken means useless," Elias continued. "But broken just means attention is required." Victor thought of his empire, of himself. He crouched, helped tighten a bolt, listened as Reggie explained load distribution. The lesson was technical, precise, generous. Victor felt a familiar joy, the joy of learning for its own sake. Later, they sat on the steps of a library. Elias asked Victor to list what he feared now. Victor hesitated, then spoke. Being irrelevant, being judged, being poor. Elias nodded. "Good. Name the fear." "Reduce its power." He asked what Victor valued now. Victor surprised himself. "Time, honesty, being useful." Elias smiled. "Those values compound." He explained how the street punished lies quickly and rewarded consistency slowly. "Your old world inverted that," he said. Victor knew it was true as afternoon shadows lengthened. A small crisis erupted, a scuffle over a jacket. Voices rose. Victor's heart pounded. Elias stepped between the men, calm, firm, respectful. He listened, reframed, offered a compromise that cost him nothing but attention. The tension dissolved. Victor watched, astonished. "You de-escalated without power," he said. Elias shrugged. "Authority borrowed from trust lasts longer." Victor felt a shift. Leadership without leverage. They walked toward evening as the city's tempo changed. Victor noticed patterns he'd never seen, who shared, who hoarded, who mediated. Elias asked him to observe, not judge. "Judgment short-circuits learning," he said. Victor nodded, practicing restraint. He realized how often he'd mistaken decisiveness for wisdom. At dusk, Elias stopped at the river again. "Lesson summary," he said. 1. Show up early. 2. Do small things well. 3. Listen first. 4. Build trust before scale. 5. Let value be visible. Victor repeated them silently. They weren't new ideas, but they were lived, not laminated. Victor's phone buzzed. Another news update, another analyst's speculation. He didn't read it. He watched the water instead. "I feel steadier," he admitted. Elias nodded. "Grounded things don't tip easily." Victor smiled. "I used to think grounding slowed growth." Elias looked at him kindly. It slows falling. As night settled, Victor thanked Elias. The word felt insufficient. Elias accepted it anyway. Victor like a mirror. He had been the system. The man people like Elias were crushed beneath. And now, ironically, that same system had turned on him. Elias leaned forward. "You think you lost everything tonight," he said. "But you still have something most men don't. Awareness. Pain woke you up." Victor scoffed. "Pain destroyed me." Elias shook his head. "No, pain introduced you to reality." He pointed at Victor's chest. "Everything you built was external, titles, numbers, power borrowed from perception. When perception collapsed, so did you." Victor looked away, ashamed because he knew it was true. A police car passed slowly, its lights briefly illuminating the alley. Elias didn't flinch. Victor did. He realized then how different their fears were. "Why stay here?" Victor asked. "If you're so smart, why not start over?" Elias's eyes darkened. "Because rebuilding requires one thing. I didn't have any more. Someone who believed I was worth investing in." The words hung heavy between them. Victor swallowed hard. For the first time, he understood the true cost of being ignored. Minutes passed. Rain softened. The city breathed. Victor checked his phone again. No new messages. Silence had replaced chaos, and somehow that scared him more. "They took everything," Victor said. "My board, my partners, my reputation. By morning the media will bury me." Elias nodded slowly. "Good," he said. Victor snapped his head up. "Good?" "Yes," Elias replied, "because now you're free from pretending." Victor laughed bitterly. "You call this freedom?" Elias met his eyes. "I call it the beginning." He stood towering slightly over Victor now. "You asked earlier if I could fix it. I can't fix your money. I can't fix your image. But I can fix what actually matters if you let me." Victor felt his heart pound. "And what's that?" Elias answered without hesitation. "You." Something inside Victor cracked. Not loudly, quietly, the kind of break that lets light in. He nodded once. "Then teach me." Elias extended his hand, not for charity, not for power, but for partnership. Victor hesitated only a second before taking it. The handshake between Victor Hale and Elias lasted longer than either man expected. Not because it was firm, but because it carried weight. Two broken worlds colliding under a leaking awning while the city pretended not to notice. Victor felt the roughness of Elias's palm, the scars that told stories no resume ever could. This was not a business agreement sealed in glass offices with lawyers and silence. This was something older, riskier. When their hands finally separated, Victor realized something unsettling. For the first time in his life, he had agreed to something without control. The thought terrified him. The thought also made him feel alive. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of cardboard, smoothing it carefully as if it were valuable. On it were scribbled diagrams, arrows, symbols half erased by rain, rewritten again and again. Victor squinted. "What is that?" Elias replied calmly. "A map of mistakes." Victor laughed despite himself. "You're going to fix my life with cardboard?" Elias didn't smile. "No, I'm going to fix your thinking." "That's harder." He pointed to one of the diagrams. "You see this?" Victor nodded uncertainly. "That's your empire. Built wide, not deep, impressive, fragile." Victor bristled. "You don't know how hard I worked." Elias looked up sharply. "Neither did my wife when she left. Hard work doesn't equal wisdom." The words stung because they were not cruel. They were accurate. Elias continued, explaining how Victor's businesses had grown fast by acquisition, by leverage, by trust in people who spoke the right language. "You outsourced your judgment," Elias said. "You paid others to think for you." Victor opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He remembered meetings he skipped, reports he signed without reading, advisors he trusted because they mirrored his confidence. Elias tapped the cardboard. "This collapse didn't happen tonight. Tonight was just when gravity finished its job." Victor felt exposed, like someone had opened his chest and read his fears aloud. "So what's your solution?" he asked. "Because I don't have years. By morning, I'm finished." Elias folded the cardboard and tucked it back into his coat. "Good," he said again.